Hello, everyone, and welcome. Wonderful to have such a big audience here today. Thanks for joining our webinar, Spotlight on the CSRD Double Materiality Assessment. Today, we will build on our previous webinars about CSRD, ESRS, and the materiality assessment and go more into detail. But rest assured, we will also introduce you to the topics. So even if you have missed our previous webinars, you will be able to connect to the content. And just some basics about the Zoom webinar platform before we actually start the content. You will all be muted during the webinar in order to ensure the best audio quality. Please feel free to send us any questions during the presentation via the question function. On the right-hand side, you can see a screenshot of the webinar window, and here you can find the button to open the Q&A window where you can type in your question and send it to us. And maybe it's also good for you to know that we will provide you with a link to download the presentation as well as a link to the recording in a follow-up email. Today, Janne and myself will be presenting. My name is Karin Ekberg and I'm the CEO and founder of Leadership and Sustainability, a company with focus on sustainability in the textile and consumer goods sector. Since we started 9 years ago, we have grown to a team of more than 80 experts worldwide. We are present in many countries such as Germany, Bangladesh, Bulgaria, China, Egypt, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, Romania, Portugal, Tunisia, Turkey, and Vietnam. And our two main streams of services are related to materiality and strategy, reporting, carbon footprinting, and greenhouse gas services on the one hand, and supply chain services and audits on the other hand. And today I'm joined by my colleague Janne Tesch. In today's session, we will start with an introduction to the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the European Sustainability Reporting Standards. And we will explain where the materiality assessment sits within these frameworks. Secondly, we will introduce the available guidance to conduct a double materiality assessment. And then we will talk about Leadership and Sustainability's approach to conduct a double materiality assessment, which will help your company identify relevant impacts, financial and non-financial risks and opportunities in the currently very dynamic legal landscape. And so why is it important to have a method on how to implement the requirements and the guidance from CSRD and then the materiality assessment guidance? Well, it's actually a guidance giving requirements on what you need to fulfill with the materiality assessment. But of course, it doesn't tell you how to do that. And that is where we come in and where we have developed our method. And then towards the end of the webinar, we would be happy to clarify any questions you might have. Let us start with understanding the CSRD and the ESRS and the role of double materiality assessments. This model shall visualize the complex structure of the EU Green Deal. In the core, we have the overarching goals, like, for example, the climate goals for 2030 and 2050, or the rapid transition to sustainable mobility. In the outer part, we find the strategies that will navigate the way towards these goals. Here we have on the right-hand side, for instance, the strategy Farm to Fork or the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030. And now let's narrow down already to the CSRD and the ESRS. First, we have the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD. It requires companies to report on how sustainability issues such as climate change, for example, impact their business and how their operations in turn affect people and planet, a unique principle called the double materiality. The CSRD provides a framework for sustainability reporting in Europe. Almost 50,000 companies are expected to be impacted by CSRD, making up some 3/4 of business in the European Economic Area. Then we have the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, or ESRS. They apply to all companies in the scope of CSRD and offer technical standards and metrics for reporting, and a lot of metrics. companies will need to assess which topics to report about by using the double materiality concept, which requires information that is material from either a financial perspective or an impact perspective. And companies will also need to include a lot of information about their value chain and what they have in place, etc., what they are planning. Together, CSRD and ESRS form a powerful system for European sustainability reporting. They complement each other and allow companies to report in a similar and a comparable way. It also allows transparency and early identification of risks. And of course, the possibility to compare reports will be facilitated by the fact that the reports must be machine readable. CSRD requires companies to disclose an integrated report on environment, social and governance, ESG. The double materiality assessment helps you to prepare for the report and map your impact areas. But please note that the report now must be a part of the financial report and cannot be published separately, except for smaller companies. You are also required to report on double materiality, and I will explain this concept later. The materiality assessment itself, as outlined in this presentation, includes the concept of double materiality. And lastly, the CSRD also requires the corporation to use third-party assurance to verify the data before publishing. And next we will talk about the key aspects of the ESRS. The reporting is now harmonized through the CSRD, and the 12 ESRS standards. And these standards, they cover all ESG, environmental, social and governance topics. The first two standards, ESRS 1 and ESRS 2, cover overarching expectations on the report. The ESRS 1 gives guidance regarding the report, and ESRS 2 cover general disclosures. And the topical standards, they are divided into environment, social and governance. All of the topical standards must be included if the respective topic is material according to your own materiality assessment. And for the environmental topics, as illustrated here, there is one caveat. In the case where ESRS E1, climate change, is deemed as not relevant, then the organization actually must explain why this should be the case. The social topics cover own workforce, workers in the value chain, affected communities, and consumers and end users. And then we have the governance topics, where the ESRS G1 standard covers business conduct. And in the process of development are standards for SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as sector-specific standards. As already mentioned, the topical standards cover environment, social and governance, and each of them need to cover the 4 disclosure areas: impact, risk and opportunity, governance, strategy, and metrics and targets. So you can imagine for environment, social and governance, you have a lot of different subtopics. You may even have sub-subtopics. And for all of those, you will be requested to inform and report about the topics that you see here to the right. So, and of course, again, the disclosures related to the topical ESG standards, they derive from the double materiality assessment. All right, so now we will talk a bit more about what the specific requirements and guidance related to the materiality assessment are. And we will lean on one document. In May 2024, the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, or EFRAG, an organization funded by the European Union, has published a document named IG1 Materiality Assessment, where implementation guidance for materiality assessments can be found. It is, of course, important to mention that this document only serves as a guidance and should not be interpreted as part of the ESRS or legally mandatory, although it is of course recommended to follow the guidance there. This document offers input on the following topics: the double materiality approach, the criteria to determine the materiality of information, the legal requirements from the CSRD and ESRS, how to engage stakeholders, how to set thresholds, and the different steps to perform the assessment according to this legislation. So in this document, you have quite a lot of rich guidance, giving a lot of information about what is expected. And then now let's discuss the general definition of the term double materiality assessment. Double materiality is the concept that provides criteria for the determination of whether a sustainability topic or information must be included in the sustainability report. And double materiality is the union of impact materiality and financial materiality. And so this is really the core concept within the reporting, because everything will be based on the materiality assessment. So the impact materiality refers to an inside-out perspective and looks at what impact a company has with its activities on different sustainability topics. Financial materiality refers to an outside-in perspective and looks at how a company's financial performance or development is impacted by a sustainability topic. For instance, a company's impact on the climate can also be financially material. So let me now tell you a story about double materiality. And this story was derived from a fairy tale of Hans Christian Andersen, the Danish storyteller, and I will call it The Mirror of Two Truths. In a quaint kingdom nestled between the mountains and the sea, a wise but aging king sought to understand the true state of Israel. He had heard whispers of two mysterious forces at play, the whisper of the people and the call of the land. Unable to grasp these forces himself, the king called upon his royal storyteller, a young dreamer named Anders, who had a knack for uncovering hidden truths in the tales he wove. Anders was tasked with creating a magical object that could reveal the kingdom's hidden truths. After months of pondering, Anders crafted the Mirror of Two Truths, an enchanted mirror that could reflect two perspectives at once. The inside reflection, this side showed how the kingdom's actions affected its people, prosperity and culture, the financial materiality. And the outside reflection, this side revealed how the kingdom's activities impacted the rivers, forests, and skies beyond its borders, environmental and social materiality. The king's quest. When the king gazed into the mirror, he saw two contrasting images. The inside reflection showed bustling marketplaces, thriving trade, and gilded palaces. But when he turned to the outside reflection, the skies were grey, the rivers poisoned, and distant villages struggling in silence. The king was struck by the double truths of his kingdom. While it prospered financially, its practices were depleting the land and leaving its people vulnerable. The villain, a cunning merchant named Lord Aurelius, who profited from the kingdom's unsustainable industries, dismissed the mirror's reflections as mere fantasies. He whispered to the king, "Focus on the glitter of gold. The outside world is not your concern." But Anders, armed with the stories of distant lands ruined by greed, argued that a kingdom ignoring its outside reflection was doomed to collapse. The turning point. One night, the mirror revealed a prophecy. If the kingdom failed to balance the two truths, a great storm would sweep through, destroying both prosperity and nature. Terrified, the king declared a great gathering of all tradespeople, farmers, scholars, and villagers to debate how the kingdom could honor both truths. The resolution. The people devised a grand double materiality charter, blending care for the land with growth for the people. For every tree cut, two were planted, For every coin earned, part was invested in village schools and clean rivers. And Lord Aurelius, seeing his schemes crumble, fled the kingdom in shame. The mirror of two truths was enshrined in the palace, a reminder to every ruler that a kingdom's strength lies in balancing its internal wealth with its external impact. And with that story told, let me return to our theory. The ESRS defines three categories: impacts, risks, and opportunities. Let us start with impacts, which are categorized within the impact materiality. A brand can have positive or negative impacts depending on their activities. A negative impact would be, for example, pollution. The use of renewable energies could have a positive impact on climate change mitigation, for example. Risks and opportunities are a part of the financial materiality. And the ESRS also differentiates between actual and potential impacts, risks, and opportunities. Potential risks, for example, means that an activity could potentially generate a financial risk in the future, while actual risks are already present and can be assessed as they are. For actual impacts, the company needs to assess the scale, scope, and time horizon for each information that was considered material. In addition to this, irremediability needs to be taken into consideration when assessing negative impacts. So how well can I clean up if I have had a discharge of toxic chemicals into my wastewater discharge, for example? And then for potential impacts, risks, and opportunities, the company needs to take the magnitude, likelihood of occurrence, and time horizon into consideration. All of these factors lead to a decision of rating all impacts, risks, and opportunities. And now let us come to the specific requirements according to CSRD and ESRS and what to report about the materiality assessment. The report should contain the description of the process used to identify material impacts, risks, and opportunities, what the material impacts, risks, and opportunities are, and what their interaction with the strategy and business model is, and the disclosure of requirements in ESRS that are covered in the sustainability statement. The methods and criteria used to assess the material information should also be part of the report. So what are the requirements related to stakeholder engagement? Well, the CSRD and ESRS demand companies to consult with stakeholders to understand how they may be impacted, to inform the workers' representatives about the sustainability reports and discuss what information is relevant to be disclosed. And companies must consider alternatives, such as consulting independent experts or NGOs in situations where stakeholder engagement cannot take place. And let me give you some more information about this topic, stakeholder engagement. It is, of course, important to talk to affected stakeholders to identify and assess the material impacts the company's activities cause to them. And by conducting stakeholder interviews or surveys, the company can assess more clearly the severity, likelihood, and time horizons of the respective impacts. This also ensures the completeness and precision of the company's identified material impacts. The ESRS defines two categories of stakeholders: the affected stakeholders, which are individuals or groups whose interests are or could be affected positively or negatively by the company's activities and its direct and indirect business relationships across its value chain. So it's quite a broad definition of affected stakeholders. And the users is the other group. The users of the sustainability statement, such as existing and potential investors, asset managers, credit institutions, etc., non-governmental organizations, governments, analysts, etc. And then we have here the following steps for conducting a stakeholder engagement. The first, that was one too much. The first step is to map the affected stakeholders and possibly prioritizing those most relevant for the assessment. And in a second step, companies should engage with the stakeholders and map the impacts experienced by them. It can be very helpful to ask for information regarding the severity, likelihood, and time horizon of each impact, positive or negative, of course, since this information is needed to conduct the materiality assessment. However, this might make the stakeholder engagement quite complex and might also be difficult for the stakeholders to respond to. They might not have all this detailed information about your organization. And the last step is to involve the affected stakeholders in the assessment of negative impacts relevant for them and asking for validation and/or feedback on the impacts that have been assessed as material by the company. And now that we have discussed the requirements and guidance to conduct the double materiality assessment, and you have seen how many different perspectives and criteria have to be combined into a stringent and clear method, I will hand over to Janne so that she can dive into leadership and sustainability's approach for conducting the double materiality assessment. Over to you, Janne.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, as Karen has mentioned, we've heard a lot about the context and the requirements for double materiality assessments. And now I will give an overview of our method and how leadership and sustainability is using those requirements and is making them available in their method. So first of all, I want to talk about the steps in general that we undergo when we conduct a materiality assessment. In a first step, we define the different value chain segments of a company, as each business operates differently and should be correctly represented in the assessment. Secondly, we need to define the different categories of impact, and then the assessment will be conducted in a matrix scheme. In the end, the assessment will then help to derive the most important impacts, risks, and opportunities. And as a final step in our client projects, we then illustrate the different materiality profiles. Let us briefly look at the evaluation matrix scheme. On one axis, the value chain segments are represented. So here, for example, management and strategy, product development, sourcing, your different supply chain tiers, your logistics function, own operations, retail operations if applicable, and other functions. And on the other axis, you can then see the environmental, social, and governance aspects. The assessment is divided then, obviously, into impacts, risks, and opportunities, and these will be assessed in each and every part of the value chain. Here in this illustration, you can only see the rough matrix structure. The assessment takes place in a really detailed manner with many different cells, and the sustainability aspects are aligned with the ESRS requirements. You can see these also on the next slide, but also Karen has mentioned them beforehand when she was talking about the ESRS requirements. Here you can see the environmental aspects, like, for example, climate change as a topic and the subtopics below, or biodiversity. And then we have social aspects on the one hand for the own workforce and for the workers in the supply chain, and governance aspects covering, for example, animal welfare or corruption and bribery. The exact sustainability criteria that we assess are selected jointly with the client. Let me now talk about the evaluation system that we developed over the past years. And this evaluation method is aligned with all the requirements that Karen has shared with us earlier. The evaluation is divided into the two parts, so impact as well as financial materiality are assessed. For impact materiality, as already mentioned, the focus is evaluating the effects of business practices on sustainability. And here, what we do is we evaluate the scale, so the intensity of an impact, the possible reach of an impact, those, for example, the number of people that are affected, and the remediability of the impacts. While assessing the potential and actual impacts, we consider the likelihood in our justification. We also look at the time horizon as CSRD requires, and normally we do assess all impacts under a time horizon of 5 to 10 years. For financial materiality, we weight the potential financial opportunities and risks on a scale of 1 to 5. The risks and opportunities entail the likelihood of occurrence through the definition itself. For example, a higher weighted risk, for example with a 5, directly shows that a potential harm is also more likely. So if the likelihood would be lower for that risk, also the scale would be lower. In our assessment, we review your risks from a financial, a brand, as well as a legal perspective. The opportunities are divided into financial and brand opportunities. Brand opportunities also indicate the potential option for a company to have positive impact. Once the assessment is conducted, as Karen has already explained, a threshold needs to be set to determine which topics are considered material and therefore need to be stated in the report. There is no fixed rule for setting this threshold. We as Leadership and Sustainability normally recommend to use a 3 as a threshold value. However, in our projects with the clients, we together discuss this threshold value. Obviously, this is a quantitative and qualitative evaluation approach. Therefore, in order to answer to that qualitative approach situation, before we go into the detailed assessment with our clients, we jointly agree on the assessment lens that we use. So normally we agree that we take a conservative perspective on the rating. And then our approach incorporates industry expertise, a high-level legal register, scientific studies, the client company's perspective, as well as stakeholder views. And as Karen has shared, there are many possible different approaches for engaging your stakeholders. And therefore, in each client project, we individually decide the engagement method together so that it fits the client's needs. Furthermore, for each and every scale that we assess, and imagine it's a huge matrix, we write down explanations and justifications. And to ensure a more robust evaluation, we also involve various departments of the client company in our assessment. We do that by conducting the so-called status assessment. This status assessment is directly reflecting how your company uses its power to create actual positive impacts. Thus, the status represents positive impacts according to the CSRD requirement. For the status assessment, we use a checklist and conduct interviews. The checklist is always highly individualized to your company structure, and the interviews help to get deep insights on the ideas of your teams. On the one hand, the results of the checklist and the interviews help us as Leadership and Sustainability to conduct the assessment. On the other hand, they also allow us to derive your company's current sustainability status. This status overview is extremely valuable as it helps companies to structure their sustainability efforts and to understand which impacts, risks, and opportunities it already addresses or not so. Because as we all know, we have highly complex business activities, and maybe one department already does a little thing for sustainability and the other as well. And it really helps to do the status assessment to have a real good structure and overview of everything that happens. Yes, and in the end, you will receive scores in your double materiality assessment. 1, excluding the sustainability measures which you have in place. Thus, you get an idea of your what we call gross impacts, risks, and opportunities. And what you also receive is an overview including your status assessment results, thus your net results. These will help you to understand how you already reacted on and reduced your negative impacts and risks. This is a special plus in our method. And on the next slide, because this has been really theoretic, I will also show you a screenshot where I explain this situation of gross results and net results again. Thus, if we conduct a double materiality assessment for you, on the one hand, we help you to fulfill the CSRD requirements and set the basis for your sustainability report. On the other hand, you will be able to derive strategic implications, and it may help to set a structured foundation for your next sustainability steps. And as mentioned, on this slide, we have added a screenshot of the final matrix representation, which summarizes your company's impacts, risks, and opportunity scores. And as already mentioned, underlying, there are much more detailed scorings and explanations. And this matrix does not contain real numbers. We added it to illustrate how you as a company can use the different result views. Here, the gross results show that the company would have highest impacts, risks, and opportunities when it comes to sourcing and climate change, as it's all weighted with a 5. But what about the net results that I was mentioning? If we assume that the company has almost no sustainability measures in place, you see here on the slide that in the net results, the impacts, risks, and opportunities are still scored with the highest weighting, so still a 5. But let us now assume that your company has already many sustainability measures in place. For example, scope 1 to 3 emissions are calculated, you source from factories that use renewable energy, you source environmental, more friendly and certified products, you have a carbon reduction plan, and you engage with your suppliers and so on. Then the net results really look different. Through the activities, the company is able to reduce its negative impacts from a 5 to 3 in this example, and also to reduce its financial risks associated with climate change. We as leadership and sustainability let opportunities as they are normally a whole range of opportunities, and even if a company does something, there still might be some open opportunities. What this slide shows is that through our approach, the double materiality assessment results really also help you to generate added value. You will have a tool in hands that also helps you to understand your status, your sustainability status, year on year, as you will be able to view how your next sustainability steps influence your double materiality assessment results. So imagine we do the double materiality assessment, the gross results look as they do on this slide, and you start as a company with almost no measures in place. So your net results look the same. And then you start to really work on sustainability. You implement different measures. And then in best case, in 2 or 3 years, your net results don't look as company A results anymore, but as the results from company B. And this is really valuable to have that approach and to really understand what you have as impacts, risks, and opportunities. Yes. And where we know this has been a lot of input, and let me therefore summarize the key takeaways of today's session. A double materiality assessment helps you to utilize a method that is effective and insightful. The value chain approach helps to organize your assessment and your strategy and allows you to derive meaningful implications for your whole business and for specific departments and specific people. If you choose to collaborate on a double materiality assessment with us, you will learn as you go through the process, and you can benefit from an experienced team. You will be able to master legislative change and especially manage what is most important, your sustainability impacts, risks, and opportunities. Yes, and if you are interested in a proposal from us, then we have a specific booking form for the double materiality assessment that you can fill out by clicking on the link provided here. And as Karen has mentioned in the beginning of our webinar, we will send out this slide deck, and then you'll have that link. Yes, and with that, we would now like to give you the opportunity to ask any open questions you might have through the Q&A box.
Thanks so much, Janne. So let us see here if we have any questions. Yes, the slides will be available after the webinar. And here is one more question. Do you think it's possible for companies to conduct an internal double materiality assessment that is acceptable for CSRD? Or is this something that really calls for a consultant? Well, of course, you can do this internally. You just have to follow the guidance and follow the rules. And so it's just a matter of developing your own method then. It may take some time, but theoretically it is possible to do it internally. Of course, we would be happy if you are interested in having a conversation with us about that, and we can see if we can support or if there is no need, so to say, for an external consultant. So I hope that responded to your question. Great. Any further question? Could you please explain the reason why in your example related to climate change, both impact and risk decrease with implementing a measure of the company? If a company implements some measure, I guess it affects only impacts. If you have if you have a climate action that reduces your impact, usually your risks will also be reduced. For example, your financial risks will be reduced. The risk that your brand will be hurt because of some accident or something that happens will also be reduced. So therefore, very often they do go hand in hand, even though the detailed methodology differentiates for different impact categories and for different risk categories. And there may be cases where perhaps only the impact is reduced and the risk remains the same, but it really depends on the actual action you take. So as Janne said, the slide that she showed here with the difference between the gross and then the net risk without action and the net risks with action, they're of course very, very high level, and beneath that lies all the different criteria that Janne explained to you in the slides, in the previous slides. Yes. Any more? Let us see. Can you share the Danish story title and the author? It was quite fascinating. This was an adapted story based on a story of H.C. Andersen, Hans Christian Andersen. Hans Christian Andersen. He has written many stories. He's of course he doesn't live anymore, but he is, at least in the Nordic countries. I come from Sweden. He's a very famous fairy tale author, Hans Christian Andersen. Okay. Someone is asking if we are operating in Bangladesh. Yes, we are. Related to materiality assessments, the work is usually done from our headquarters in Germany, but we always work with our team members in our different locations, also on different projects, so that can be organized as well. Do you have a specific approach for voluntary sustainability reporting standards for SMEs? No, we don't. But for the materiality assessment, of course, for an SME, the materiality assessment needs to be adjusted accordingly, and will be basically a lighter touch, let's say, depending also on the requirements you have from CSRD or from ESRS. The topics might be different, so it would be adapted accordingly. But we don't have a ready-made method that we would apply. Yes. Any digital tool available for double materiality assessment? There are lots of different digital tools, and we don't recommend any of them. There are lots of also startups that are generating digital tools, but this is something you would need to research by yourself. If you are interested in having support in looking for a tool, we can support with that though. And then when doing the stakeholder consultation to evaluate the different aspects, risks, opportunity, financial, do you apply a weight depending on the stakeholder answering? So because we have a scale, as you heard, we usually apply a scale 1 to 5 when it comes to the impacts, risks, and opportunities. We do have a differentiation between these scale steps, so to say. But when conducting the stakeholder assessment, you need to decide how much in detail you go, because you need to consider the stakeholders you are talking to. Some might be very informed about sustainability topics, but they might not know so much about your company. So therefore, it needs to be given a good balance, so that it, first of all, the stakeholders have some information about your company and your programs, but then, of course, that they can respond in a good way without having to apply a theory that perhaps in practice is not working for them. So, for example, we usually do not recommend to have just surveys where you ask, is this topic important on a scale 1 to 5 or whatever, 1 to 10, or is this topic important? Because we think the different impact categories, depending on the segment of the value chain that they are applied to, they might have very different importance. And so to use this GRI representation that we sometimes see with an X and an Y axis, and you position the different topics, that is not a representation that gives enough depth according to the CSRD and the ESRS or the guidance. So it's just a too general approach.
And also to mention, as I've said, it's a qualitative and quantitative approach to do that assessment. And that's why we take the stakeholder input also as a qualitative input, and we see how we can use that. So it's not, you cannot just give it a number because it's still qualitative. And we think that's really important also to consider. And that's why also the survey thing can be difficult to be used. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. And then we have a question, what is the difference between the CSRD standard and the GRI standard? Well, we can probably talk many hours about that. There are lots of differences and there are some similarities. So you know the GRI standard has been around for probably at least 20 years. It's a voluntary standard, it's a global standard. And it also even includes the need to report about the materiality assessment, but that is not detailed at all. It only mentions impacts, risks, and opportunities. And then in the GRI, you have a lot of different impact areas. You have a lot of indicators that you can report on. So in that sense, it's similar to the CSRD or ESRS reporting. The ESRS reporting, however, is much more comprehensive. And of course, it is the European Union. So it's a directive that is part of the European Union legislation. So it's a law. So the companies that fall into these different categories, and there is a sequenced approach to when companies need to report depending on the size of the companies. But these are required indicators, and you have, as I mentioned, several different general topics that you need to report on. And then for your material topics, you have to report a lot of indicators and KPIs, both qualitative and quantitative. So I would say the scope and the depth of the ESRS or CSRD is much deeper than the GRI, even though the GRI has been expanding the scope over the past years as well. So that's in a nutshell the differences. Okay. Yes. Is there a deadline on when SMEs, which are important to European market, have to conduct CSRD according to the European Union request? We can look that up. It depends on the size of your company. So SME, it depends on the size and the size of your business in Europe. And we can look it up and send out to you later, but I don't have it available right now. I know that we have covered that in one of our previous webinars. Yes. So let's take note. You probably would need to send us, but you can send it separately as well if you wish. You can just send us an email and we will respond to that question. And are there any further questions? Anything you would like us to discuss further? The number of KPIs and indicators in the ESRS the total number is of more than 1,000 indicators. A lot of work, really a lot of work. So I can only recommend for those of you who are affected by the CSRD, ESRS, start early enough even if you have to report only in 2026, you will have to report about 2025, which means that you need to set up your reporting scheme already in 2025 so that you have enough time and collect your indicators and the information on time. All right, let's wait another half minute and see if there are any more questions coming in. No? Okay, so one final slide with our contact details, and you will receive this slide deck and the recording within the next few days, probably not today and probably also not tomorrow, but within the next few days you will receive this. And once you log out of the webinar, there will be a few questions for you. Please fill out that questionnaire. It is always great for us to get the feedback from you. And thank you so much for your time, and let us know if we can support in any way. And with that, I will say goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.